Okay, I'm back again here at Sandy Hollow. Now this is on the battlefield itself. This is where the second or third line would have formed. The third line would have formed right in the middle of this field out back here. Now I'm back here because I kind of was investigating the battlefield recently, and I came across some new information that I found from a friend of mine in another source. Now, during the time that Howe and Cornwallis were doing their outflanking maneuver, they were coming up through Birmingham Township. They stopped at a place, as we described before, which was Osborne's Ridge, or Osborne's Hill, as they call it. Now, they would have stopped there for 45 minutes. They would have refreshed their army. Howe would have refreshed his army. And then they advanced towards Street Road, towards 926 and Street Road. All right, a little information that I came across was that the left of, or the right of Washington's line was French. Now, he had most of his line over at 926 and Street Road, probably about 100 yards behind that. There was an apple orchard there where the Continentals, the Virginia Continentals, were stationed. Now, that line where the orchard was, I thought was the end of the line, but unfortunately for me, that I found some new information stating that they could have been a little bit further. Now, during my research, I found out that some of the light infantry, the British light infantry, they came to Street Road. Now, they would have came up 926 or to 926 from Street Road in formation. Now, they would have been in formation. Now, they didn't go just march side by side. They would have been arm's length away. So basically, you would have a soldier on each side at your arm's length. Now, if you have close to about 9,000, as Howe and Cornwallis had, the lines pretty much were at least a mile long. Now, the center of the line going down to 926 was cavalry. They had the cavalry in the middle, and then they had the grenadiers on the right. It was the prized honor in that line. And also, they would have had British light infantry. And some of the European or the German Jaggers would have came down. Now, these guys had different uniforms, like I was saying before. They would have had short coats, the British light infantry. They would have had round hats cocked on one side. Now, these guys didn't carry much equipment because they were used to moving really fast. Now, a couple interesting aspects about the British light infantry was that these guys were in advance of the main corps. Before the 44th or the 43rd would have came down Street Road, the British light infantry would have advanced further in front towards 926. Now, they did this in two ways. They took their best light infantry guys. Now, they would have had a shorter musket. They would have had just a cartridge box. They wouldn't even have carried a canteen. They would have had light infantry. They would have had light equipment. Now, they advanced. They advanced toward Apple Orchard at 926th Street Road, which time they saw the Virginia Continentals. Now, these guys were tough. They were battle-hardened Continentals. These guys didn't run. They would have stayed. Now, a little bit more research I did. I was at the battlefield itself, the state-owned battlefield. There was a gentleman there, a British officer, during the battle who sketched. He sketched the Battle of Brandywine. Now, this is the only sketch that we have, but what was good about this gentleman was that he sketched from life. He didn't just make up things on the battlefield. He actually sketched what he saw. Now, from what I've seen in this photograph and what was noted in 2003 when it was found in Britain in the archives, was that there was a line at Street Road and the British had stopped. Now, what they did, they would have went in formation up the Street Road. And at that time, they would have broke ranks. They would have just ended up in a line. And it would be guys side by side, and they would just be going at it with the American line, which was about, like I said, about 100 yards in front of them. Now, the light infantry wasn't at Street Road in 926. What they had to do, they saw the American line, they had to outflank the position. Now, during this time, to get around the army, around these lines, the light infantry would have advanced left. Now, what they did, like I said, I found that information, was that they went towards the Thornbury Farm, which still exists today. Now, they would have outflanked the position because where the Americans were at Street Road, from this diagram, or this watercolor, as they call it, from this British officer, shows woods. There was woods where the Americans stood. Now, these guys, the Americans were pretty smart. The British would have stood in a line and wanted the Americans to fight line to line. Now, I kind of thought that for a while, that they did that, but I think the Americans would have been in the woods. They stationed themselves so that they couldn't get shot at. If the British were shooting at them, they could stand behind trees or other obstacles not to get hit. That shows on that map. It shows that they hid behind different obstructions, which was correct. And they had guns. They actually showed 3 cannons on top of Birmingham Hill, just a little bit north of the meeting house, which I didn't know at the time. Now, the Jaggers were an elite corps of British and some Germans. They would have carried a different type of rifle. It was called a rifle for a reason. It was a rifled barrel. Now, these guys were pretty proficient at shooting. They had a smaller gun. It wasn't a Brown Bess. It was more of a European sporting weapon that was rifled. They could pin you from 100 yards with that gun, no problem. Now, like I said, they were on Thornbury Farm. This is what I didn't know. They outflanked the position there. The Americans were stationed in the woods on the Birmingham Heights, as they called it at the time. And the light infantry went around. Now, what the British did is, I saw on this watercolor that I was looking at, I noticed that some of the British were dead on Street Road. They show these little guys. This guy had sketched this. They show a line of British, I mean, at least a half a mile wide on Street Road. And they show like dead or wounded soldiers standing in front or laying on that fence line at 926 where the road is. Now, that's miraculous to see that. You actually have a first-hand account of something that happened almost 200 and some years ago. It's miraculous that that watercolor survives, but it does, and we get a lot of new information from this watercolor. It shows guys, British officers, and there's a little bit of blue coloring on their uniforms. Now, the blue coloring dictates that they were British. They were for the artillery. They were pulling cannons along 926. These were 12-pound guns that the British had. They had howitzers and they had mortars at that time. They brought up from, on the march towards Birmingham, they brought these weapons with them. Now, another thing that I didn't find out about the battle itself was that going up Osborne's Hill, or Osborne's Ridge as they called it, that the guns were heavy. These weapons were large. If you ever get a chance to go to the state-run battlefield, you'll see there's 2 British guns in there. They're 12-pounders. They were used at Brandywine. It's very rare to have guns that were noted to the battle. These would have been on British carriages. They would have been pulled by 2 horses, possibly 3. It depends on if they were pulling a limber also. They had problems bringing this ammunition and these cannons over the heights. They mentioned it. A lot of times when these marches went on, they had books with them. They were meticulous, the British, with records, and also a lot of engineers after the battle sketched maps. Basically, the guns were heavy. They had problems bringing them over Osborne's Ridge. Now, during this march, it was completely desolate. It was basically just farmers' fields. There was no obstructions. There was no trees. There might have been clumps of trees in the area, but there was generally just a flat surface to pull these guns. And they said that in their memoirs, or the things that they put down, was that the guns were heavy. They were heavy to pull over the Birmingham or Osborne's Ridge. So like I said, the new information was the sketch that I didn't know about. Also, there was a sketch done after the Battle of Brandywine, probably around, it was just before the Paoli Massacre, or the Battle of Paoli, where the British had camped. They camped in the Great Valley. Now, the Great Valley is basically, actually you can see the Great Valley from here. It's a ridge that runs from Lancaster and it goes to Valley Forge. And it's a gap between 2 ridges. It's Mount Misery and Mount Hope. And that's just where Washington had stayed. To get through the Great Valley, it was very easy. It was flat terrain. There was a road. It was it was called the Lancaster Pike at the time. Basically, it went from Lancaster to Philadelphia. Now, the British traveled very much on these roads. To get back to the battle, like I said, there was another watercolor done by this man. It was found where the British had camped in the Great Valley, and it shows a fence line. Now, these fences were drawn very well by this man. He knew what he was doing. He was a smart man, whoever did these drawings. I think they have the name of them, but I can't recollect it right now. Now, what he did is he sketched these from what he saw. Now, how they think that is because this sketch, the second sketch, the one that was done in the Great Valley, it had a dead tree in the front of it, and it showed a little creek, and then it showed horses drinking from the creek. Now, to paint like a dead tree, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you paint all live trees? So they think that this was this man did it from life. He did all these watercolors from what he saw. So this encampment, they show no British going around. They show the teepees, the British tents that they had, and they also show a lot of wigwams. So basically, the British at this time must have left some of their equipment behind, because if they're making wigwams as they're camping, not camping but station, they were definitely low on supplies, the British. And from the sketch itself, there's probably about 600 men in this camp. Now, like I said, Howe and Cornwallis, after the Battle of Brandywine, they stayed in this area for about 5 days. At that time, they departed towards Philadelphia. Now, they would have broke their army up. This is absolutely true from what we see in this map. They would put different soldiers in different areas to protect things, or to advance at a certain location. They would use not the whole army. It was cheaper to have different people go out, like some of the light cavalry go out, rather than the whole army moves. It's very hard to get 16,000 troops moving at one time. So what they did is they put scouts or different groups of people in different areas. That was done in this sketch. Now, like I said in the sketch, the fences were beautiful. They show the zigzag fences. There's some here on this battlefield. I'm looking at them now, where they actually take two pieces of fence rail, and they put it in an X, and they just stack these on top of that, and they go across. And they just do this in a field. It's basically to keep your cattle in a certain area. It's a deterrent for them to move further in the farmer's field. Now, another thing also they show, it's called rail and post and rail fencing. Post and rail fencing, if you know the Civil War, they did Pickett's Charge. They, in the front of the road where the Confederates came into, that was a picket rail fence. Now, that was a big one. That was 5 rails and 1 post. That's pretty big. But in this sketch, we see that basically it's 3. It's just what we would see today. So what we, if you get a posted rail fence today, you're buying history, because these existed back in colonial times. Now, like I said, it was sketched. Now, he sketched both types of fences. He didn't sketch just one. He sketched the old X-type fence and also the posted rail fence. Now, why would he do this? He's doing it from life. He's doing from exactly what he sees. Now, this is great for us that we found this material in 2003, because it helped us put together some of the movements during this time. Now, as we know, the Battle of Brandywine happened, and it happened kind of quickly. More and more that I'm looking at it and noting some of the British accounts of this battle, when they did reach Street Road in 926, basically what happened was the British had formed along a fence that was sketched, and basically they fired volleys, and the next thing that the British did was attach their bayonets on their weapons, and then they charged. This was probably done at 926, because basically it's the beginning of the war. They wanted to push the Americans out of here as quickly as they could. But the Americans on Street Road put up a really defiant resistance for at least an hour. Now, they formed over at the Birmingham Meeting House during this time, and they formed about 200 to 300 yards at Street Road in front towards the north, like I said. And they also formed all the way down near Chad's Ford, Pennsylvania, as we were talking about before. Now, Sullivan and Sterling's divisions would have came up. There was only a couple roads during this time near Chadds Ford. Now, like I said before, with these British engineers, they were wonderful. They actually sketched the roads. They sketched the cart paths that was in the area. So that gives us a really good idea of the terrain that these Americans had to face. Now, these cart paths that was sketched, there was only one from Chadds Ford up to this area. So they had to bring their cannons, they had to bring their ammunition up to this area right here. And boy, that was, you know, they had to go through briar bushes. They had to run through farmers' fields. And they also had to pull their artillery up to this area. But because of these maps that the British made, it gives us a wonderful idea of how things were designed, how things were incorporated during these battles. It's absolutely incredible that they show coming down from Baltimore Pike. It would have been the German commander when they split Howe and Cornwallis's army. They show the advancements and they show the ranks that they marched in. There would have been the Queen's Rangers. There would have been, you know, these Hessian soldiers. These guys were in the front of the line. So if anything were to happen along this march, as we were talking about Maxwell's light infantry, they were in the woods. They would have shot at you. You didn't know where these guys were. Now, Washington, like I said, was having severe losses because of the British light infantry. Now, the British light infantry would come out before the main force of the British Army, and they would push the Americans out. Now, Washington was smart. In about the winter of 1777, he put together some corps. He put together Maxwell's light infantry. Now, these guys, now Maxwell himself was he was a woodsman. He was a very accomplished woodsman. During this time, a lot of people had to go out and get their food. Now, he was good. He'd have a Kentucky rifle, and he could pin you from 200 yards, no problem, this guy. Now, he trained soldiers. He trained a lot of these guys that were frontiersmen. They lived out in the woods. They fired weapons because they had to. We put them together, and basically, this was their second or third engagement during the war. They would have been stationed on either side of Baltimore Pike. And there was many engagements, like I was saying before in previous videos, where Maxwell's light infantry was firing upon the British that were coming down the Chadds Ford. There's battles that are noted from British engineer maps that show swords, crossed swords on the map. Now that dictates where a battle happened. And battles did happen all along near Chadds Peak. If you live in this area in Chester County, you'll know Chadds Peak. It's a ski resort. It closed probably around the late 80s. Now that was, the Maxwell's Light Infantry was on that hill. Now if you go onto Google Earth and you see the elevation, it's high. It's the highest peak in that area. Now Maxwell's Light Infantry knew this. He had intelligence that told him where to go. Now, Baltimore Pike diverts off now. There's Old Baltimore Pike and New Baltimore Pike. Old Baltimore Pike looks exactly like it would have been back then, except for the houses. Now, like I was saying before about Chester County roads, a lot of our roads here are sunken. If you drive along these cart paths, as they were known, they're sunken. Because of over the years, a lot of these wagons these farmers had would erode the surface and it would go down into the ground. Now, when it did that, you'd have earthen embankments on each side. Now, during the Battle of Brandywine in 1777, a lot of these cart paths were right on top of the farmers' fields. So as the British traveled along these cart paths, you could spot them from a mile away. You knew where they were. Now, to get back to this sketch, like I said, that was done in the Great Valley, it's a beautiful example of something that can be found and used to our advantage in the future. Now, like I said, because of this sketch that I saw, I know now that the American line was further down from the apple orchard on 926th Street Road. Also, it's a great, interesting glimpse into Chester County's history. Now, this area would have been farmed back in the 1680s. The first settlements in this area would have been during that time. There were Quakers that would have came to this area. Now, to see an area painted is incredible to see that, because photography didn't come in. We don't know what this area looked like. But from this sketch and some of paintings that I see of Chester County back in probably the 1820s, that this landscape that you see behind me is exactly what the British and the Americans would have saw back then. There was trees. There would have been tree lines like this. There would have been fields now. Now these fields would have had crops on them at this time. This is September 2nd right now. Now they would have had winter wheat growing possibly, or they would have had different crops that would be resistant into the fall season. Now crops like this, now it's a plowed field here. This is Sandy Hollow. This is where the American line would have been, like I said before. But what I wanted to mention was the tree line in the distance. This house that you see all the way back there, that's where the Lafayette Memorial is. This tree line is exactly what the British would have saw as they came up Street Road. They would have saw a tree line, and they would have had, all our troops would have been stationed in that tree line. They wouldn't have came in an open field and fought the British during the first engagements. They would not have done that. The reason why I know this is because of that watercolor. It shows the Americans in that tree line. Now it shows a lot of British dead too on the ground, which is, they probably sent a couple volleys out of that tree line towards that British line that was a mile long. But from what I've seen in this area, this is exactly what it would have looked like. It's great that Birmingham Township, the township we're in right now, restores these areas to exactly the way they would have looked like. Basically, also, if you go to the Paoli or the Paoli battlefield, that's pretty much what it looked like. They even put the fences up where they were originally. The reason why we notice also there's no watercolors done of that area, the reason why we know this is because of accounts, American accounts. General Anthony Wayne was the commander during that time. He had about 11,000 or 1,100 Continental troops, Pennsylvania Continental troops stationed there. Now they were going to harass the British baggage, like I was saying before, while Washington went to Reading to replenish his military supplies. So basically, he knew where the British were. Anthony Wayne knew that. But the reason why the battlefield looks like the way it does today there is because Anthony Wayne was charged with treason, I guess, or some type of military dishonor, because they thought he ran. They thought he didn't fight. But like I said, we went over the Battle of Paoli. They came in at night with bayonets. There was no really gunfire. We didn't know what was going on. So basically, after Anthony Wayne was dismissed of these charges, a lot of accounts came through about different things about this battlefield and what it looked like. So that's why we know what it looks like through accounts. But they restored it beautifully. It looks very nice today. It looks exactly like it would. Now this is a little different. We're at Sandy Hollow. I was here before. Now these tree lines wouldn't have existed. This would have been a complete open field. But the road in the distance wouldn't have been there. That's called Bloody Lane. It's where, if you see the joggers in the distance, the road would have been in that area. It still exists today. It's incredible that these roads that we drive on exist. The Bloody Hollow, or Bloody Lane there, that's where it was contested. Now, the British were pushing the Americans into this area. But like I said before, you had Lafayette in that field saying stop. They stopped the troops in that field. Now, that lane was contested hotly. Almost 300 bodies lay in that lane as they were coming through here. So the lane still exists, but this tree line's what I wanted to say, was all these trees wouldn't have been here. Now, when people colonized this area, they would have had tracts of land. This was called the Welsh Tract. Now, the Welsh Tract was a Penn grant back around probably 1690s. And during the Welsh Tract, it was cut up into different acreage, 300 acres, 1,000 acres. Now, the person that owned this land would have owned about 300 acres. It would have been a little bit bigger than this. It might have been even 1,000 acres at the time. Now, it would have went this way. It would have went east and west. Now, as you see in the distance, these fields still exist, but the tree lines wouldn't have been here. They would have cut wood. They would have used it for sawmills. Now, they used a lot of wood for fire. So basically, cooking and heating, they had to use wood. They didn't have coal back then. So they had to take a lot of these trees down. I think they were happy to get rid of them, because the more trees they took out, the better farming they had. This soil today is still very fertile for putting corn and soybeans in. Now, like I said, it would have been, from where I'm standing here, this is a high position. If I'm a Continental soldier and I'm standing on this ridge, I can see in the distance. I can actually see the Great Valley, like I said before. So I can see for a distance where the British are, what they're doing, where their cannons are going. So they had a lot of intelligence on this hill. Now, like I said before, this was the third line. As the Americans were starting to retreat out of this area, it started to get a little dark. It got dark. By the time they got to Dilworth Town, it was almost getting towards sunset. Now, like I said, they would have retreated out of this area, but they would have contested this area hotly. A lot of accounts say that Washington himself was here. Now, Greene, the fighting Quaker, he was here also. Now, he had brought reserves into this area late in the day. He knew that there was a battle going over, Greene knew that the battle was happening. Now, he had reserves stationed by Washington's headquarters in Chadds Ford. Now, during this time, there was probably a dispatch to General Greene saying, hey, listen, the battle is hotly contested in this area. So Greene's division, he had a lot of reserves. Now, they came up from Chadds Ford to this area, and they made that in 45 minutes. Now, if you think about riding a bike in this area, I can't even get down to Chadds Ford in that time. They ran up here, they were pulling cannons, they were going through briar bushes, they were jumping fences. They came to this area as quickly as possible to reinforce this line that Washington was trying to hold. Now, Washington himself would have been in this area late in the day. He wasn't here. He was down at Chadds Ford. He was, finding the movements there. But late in the day, he knew that Chadds Ford was going to be taken. Now, those guys came across the creek. They jumped in, they put their rifles above their heads, and they came across the creek. Now, they pushed us out of Chadds Ford. Now, all the retreating Americans were coming up Baltimore Pike. Now, if you see Route 1 today where Chadds Ford is, that is an intersection. It's 202 and Route 1. Now, the Americans would have converged there because basically they're retreating out of this area. They're coming from Dilworth Town. They're coming around in these open fields. They would have went to Baltimore Pike because it's the biggest road in the area. Now, they would have met at 202 and Route 1. Now, there's many accounts that I've read where there was cannons placed at that intersection. As the Americans were pushed out of Chadds Ford, they accumulated in an area, like I said, in that area. Now, they gave the British some, they didn't run out of the area. Now, it was getting dark. It was getting to be dusk outside because they couldn't really see. But they wanted to let the British know not to advance or follow them, so they kept putting a lot of fire into the British. Now, there's an account at Dilworth Town after the battle of a lot of these Quakers being rounded up. Now, the reason why they were rounded up was because they didn't want these Quaker locals to go to the American Army and tell them that the British weren't following them to Philadelphia. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these Quakers were put into Dilworth Town Inn. There's accounts of them being put in the basement and being held for an amount of time, which was true, I think, from stories that get handed down. Now, it could be true because the problem that Howe had was that he didn't pursue the American Army from this position here in Dilworth Town. Now, there's a couple reasons for this. The reason is it's got late. The Americans didn't like to fight at night, neither did the British. They couldn't see what was going on. Another reason was they were tired. They made a march all the way from Kennett Square. They marched from 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning, and they marched all the way to Osborne's Ridge, which took the whole day. Now, September 11th started off to be a foggy day, so that kind of, he had a hindrance in the movements, so nobody knew where the flanking maneuver was going to go. Now, what happened after that? It started to lift. The fog lifted, it got to be a little bit hot. Now, September 11, 1777, during the day, started to get hot. Now, these guys marched. That's another reason. They were tired. When they got up on Osborne's Ridge, they had to stop for 45 minutes and refresh themselves on top of that ridge. Now, that was a bad mistake by Howe, because basically when he's up on Osborne's Ridge refreshing his army, the Americans are forming their lines down at Birmingham. They knew that their flanking maneuver was going to happen, so they advanced troops, like I said, from Chadds Ford all the way up to the area. Another reason why the battle or Howe didn't follow the army was they probably had weapons that didn't function at the time. Now, these weapons were flintlock or firelock muskets that they call them. Now, they fired these many times. The British just didn't fire once and fire again and again. They would have charged with bayonets. They would have also used their muskets frequently. Now, the reason why the British stopped, there's probably a couple reasons, like I said. Now, they had muskets that weren't operative. So the problem with Howe and Cornwallis is he could have had the Americans here. He could have stopped their position. They could have crushed the American army right here. Now, they didn't do that. That happened a couple times with Howe. He stopped his army. He didn't follow the Americans. He let the Americans go to Chester and refresh themselves. Today we see we have a lot of different things today. We have a lot of freedoms today. I mean, if you think back and you think about these battles, what could have happened? You know, the Americans, as they were retreating from this area, were tired. They just wanted to, refresh themselves. But it was a very hotly contested battle, the Battle of Brandywine. And, Washington's forces this is before Valley Forge. So basically, they were kind of like militia. But a lot of these hardened Continentals fought in lines. They knew how to fight. They were very good at what they did. So I just wanted to mention that this, again, I'm here at Sandy Hollow, but I wanted to go over a couple things that I found out recently that I didn't know before. So I'm glad that I got some of information out on YouTube. So if you guys have any questions or comments, that will be fine with me. But this is Sandy Hollow, and it's September 2nd, and I'm looking forward to filming the Battle of Brandywine over at the battlefield itself.